This is a scholarly book. This is not this is not pulp fiction. It is a deep dive and well documented on what the Nazis believed and what they did. And Eric, I want to clarify one thing with you that I didn't walk away knowing for sure, and maybe you don't know the answer. How much of this did they believe or make a pact with, and how much was just being used?
That became a central question for me as I was going through different sources. So one thing I can say, Heinrich Himmler, Rudolf Hess, truly believed in a lot of these different doctrines, border sciences like parapsychology, dowsing, astrology. They truly believed that if you did it in a scientific way, you could glean answers that mainstream science and religion would not give you.
So he was looking into Himmler was looking into the Holy Grail. He was, at the end, I guess you could credit this to Tesla, but I'm not sure if he credited it more to Tesla or to Thor's hammer. I mean,
exactly.
Which was it? Was it Tesla, or was it he believed the Thor hammer electricity in the air?
We have Peter Longerich, one of the greatest historians of the Third Reich and the Holocaust, and other sources both corroborate him asking his acolytes to look into whether the energies that we associate with Thor's hammer can be somehow harnessed, that maybe they're not traditional scientific energies, but something more occult or hidden. And that's why certain of the gods had certain powers. He thought he was the reincarnation of Otto the Great, or Henry the Fowler, one of the great medieval German princes. Many people have noted Himmler's actual investment in these ideas, as well as Hess. What I find, though, and that's where the real debate comes, is that many other Nazis, Otto Ohlendorf, who led the Einsatzgruppe and to kill thousands of Jews, he was seen as a kind of one of these technocrats, highly educated. Turns out he was pushing biodynamic agriculture and anthroposophic, which is an occult doctrine, approaches to the world as a kind of, not a substitute religion, but as something that could unite religion and science in the Third Reich. He's not normally associated with those ideas. Hitler had a dowser in the Reich Chancellery to look for cancer-causing death rays, and gave an honorary degree to one of the progenitors of world ice theory.
Some in the Third Reich said that they found Mussolini through divining rods or dowsing over a map, and you document that really well. Did Hitler believe that stuff?
So I would say he's perfectly representative of the Nazi movement and maybe Austro-German society. He's right in the middle. He clearly believed in some of these doctrines because he'd grown up with them, and he didn't find traditional Catholicism compelling, and he didn't embrace modern science because he considered it a Jewish science and was too empirical. But he wasn't as invested as some other Nazis were, like Himmler or Hess. On the other hand, there were a few Nazis like Heydrich. He's one of the only leaders I can find who almost never shows authentic investment in any of these ideas and wants to combat them as another form of sectarianism. So he doesn't care what religion, occult, or philosophical doctrine you have, whether you're a liberal, communist, or even a conservative. If you're not a Nazi, that's potentially a problem. So Heydrich goes after occultists, but many of the other leaders who claim they don't like the occult, like Rosenberg or Himmler, actually just don't like people who practice it in a way that challenges their beliefs. The minute, by the way, this is the problem with a lot of religion, right? People argue that they have the true faith and the true method or path to the Lord, right? So what you see in the Third Reich, much like occultism more generally, is claims that they're doing it scientifically. They understand it. These other people are charlatans. And many historians, when they saw that superficially, who weren't particularly interested in research, would say, oh, they're hostile to occultism. And I point out they're not hostile to it epistemologically. They're hostile to anyone who practices it in a way that isn't compatible with their racial ideas, their politics, their propaganda.
It actually worked to the West's advantage to some degree. The SS Obergruppenführer Kammler, who was really only known for making the crematoriums in Auschwitz more effective, was the replacement for von Braun in the rocket science department because, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it because of horoscopes or astrology?
We can't confirm it's because of astrology. What we can confirm is that Himmler preferred to have SS men who shared some of his approaches to science and politics and race theory around him more than tried and true professionals like von Braun. And that's why Speer, as you see in my chapter, the primary sources I have from the archives are Speer reminding all the other Nazi leaders, we aren't going to come up with miracle weapons that are going to decide the war. This is propaganda. And then you have Goebbels and Himmler and Kammler saying, oh, no, we can do this with enough will, with enough faith, if we harness the right energies. And clearly that tips over into the realm of border science very often. And it's not empirical. It's not something that's actually feasible.
Towards the end, it seemed to really work to the West's advantage again. Their race theory and their belief in these, what you call border sciences. I was really interested in what you said, that one of the reasons why we think that they weren't farther along with the nuke is because they saw that as a Jewish science. And so it was a little underplayed. And the border sciences, the miracle weapons, were looked at with possible equal shot of it working. Do I have that right?
Exactly. You have two parallel things going on. Obviously, they lose a lot of the best scientists who may have been, quote-unquote, liberal or Jewish, right? Many who stay are still top scientists, Heisenberg, Max Planck, right, von Braun. But they're carrying out traditional science, mainstream science. And then you've got a lot of Nazis led by Himmler, who's got this whole institute, the Ahnenerbe, the Institute for Ancestral Research, who's frustrated that they don't want to work with his scientists, who are operating based on folklore and Indo-Aryan race theory and want to experiment with hidden electrical energies. And the one thing I'm certain of is that the incompatibility of those two cultures certainly undermined some of their strategic thinking. We know that Hitler and Himmler, because they read science fiction, liked the idea of rockets and ships and jets and didn't think in terms of these more abstruse ideas like nuclear physics, which not only is something you can't concretely hold or build, but is something they associate with abstract thinking of Jews and liberals and communists.
Thank God.
Thank God. But in a way, now I can't quantify. A lot of the things I bring up in the book, as scholarly as it is, are things that someone else who's a specialist in these areas, armaments, military history, should really pursue and see to what degree this really did undermine their war effort. I suggest it did. Speer suggests it does. But, that's a whole other line of research. Yeah.
Eric, I could spend hours with you. I'd love to have you back, because we haven't gotten into some of the miracle weapons and the Bell, which the flying saucer and anti-gravity stuff that they supposedly were working on, but we're really not sure if they were.
Exactly.
I'd love to continue our conversation on that. I do want to switch gears, because you wrote another book, which I have not read, The Price of Exclusion: Ethnicity, National Identity, and the Decline of German Liberalism. Just based on the title, I have a feeling we would have a lot to learn from that in today's world.
We would. And the second book, Living with Hitler, Liberals in the Third Reich, which I think you'd appreciate most of all. We have slightly different political views, but I think you'll find the arguments in that book about the way that progressives kind of sold out to fascism, not because they were fascists, but because they saw certain continuities that made accommodation possible. I think you'd find that interesting.
Eric, I don't want to turn you political, but if you had any historic milestones that would be important, there's CPAC announced that they are having the National Front speak from France, which is a national socialist party. I think they're doing it because they'll say there's lots of things that we do have in common, and we don't have to take that. And this is a big movement that is happening all around. And any lessons from history?
Well, and if anything unites the three books I've written, which have been written in a time when I would argue our so-called liberal parties have moved to the right on socioeconomic issues, and then in other ways embraced values issues, fights over values, and our right has done the same thing. What you see happening is an unwillingness for we could maybe both agree that it's the role of Wall Street and government elites who don't want to fight it out over the actual empirical realities of how do you get the best health care or the best tax policy. They fight it out over ideology and values, and those values have moved more and more towards what I would argue the populist right. So how do you win elections in America and France and the Netherlands now? you claim you're going to protect people in ways that can never quite be explained from global forces, other ethnicities, religions, terrorism, economic forces that both parties used to embrace, right? Trade. Oh, those are dangerous. And this, of course, moves both parties, but obviously our right wing more than our what I now call our center, towards what we used to call, we now call the alt-right, but we used to call fascism. And that's very dangerous. That's, especially in America, you could always trust conservatives to defend the Constitution, to be at least classical liberals, right? And as you're pointing out, you can't always trust that anymore. And if our so-called liberals have to be the constitutional conservatives, we're in trouble, right? They're the interventionists, right? They're the ones, the progressives, who always want to tear down the Constitution or change it, and now they're the ones defending the FBI and the Constitution. We have a constitutional crisis. We have a political, cultural crisis. I think both traditional conservatives and so-called liberals or progressives could agree on this. And the lessons of history from the 20s and 30s are scary ones, the way this happens.
Eric, I'd love to talk to you again. Thank you so much, and thank you for the really hard work. I've read a lot of books, and I don't think I've read one that I think took more hard work than this. This was turning over every stone, and thank you for your hard work. One more last question. Would you definitively say the National Socialist movement of Germany was not a Christian movement?
When you're talking about a country of 80 million people and 20 or 30 million who supported the Nazis, obviously lots of Christians saw something in Nazism, whether it was extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism,
sure,
Lutheran kind of patriotism.
Sure.
But when it comes to the leaders, and here's where I feel I'm on solid ground, those leaders were frustrated by traditional Christianity, which they linked to Judaism and to universalism and to a world beyond the here and now, which they saw as not helpful in creating a racial ancestor-worshipping blood and soil movement. That's why they liked Shinto and Hinduism and Buddhism, whether they interpreted those religions properly or not. They saw them as more compatible with creating a religion of the here and now.
Eric, thank you.
And so in that, I would say they weren't, the leaders at least, were not Christians by any conventional sense of the word. No.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Hitler's Monsters is the book, A Supernatural History to the Third Reich. Eric Kurlander is the artist. We're going to have him back on again. There's so much to go through in this.
I want to talk to him about all the miracle stuff. The bell. Did you even know what the bell is? It is, just look it up. Let's just look up Nazi bell. Never heard of it. Never heard of it. And it's fascinating. Whether it happened or not, I don't know. So, what'd you think, Stu?
I mean, it's fascinating. I'm as you are, and as several people around here are, just real nerds when it comes to learning about that era, because it's just fascinating that any of that happened. And I mean, obviously, first and foremost, horrifying. But then beyond that, it just, the fact that these people somehow got power and did all this crazy crap with it is just fascinating to me.
We should bring him in and then invite people to come and just listen to him. Maybe spend a weekend with him. Because I've done some research off of this book, not research, but just looking up some of the stuff.
It gets you Googling. All of these books get you Googling.
Oh, my gosh. And it's fascinating. You watch some of the movies from the early 1920s in Germany, and all of a sudden, so much just starts to make sense to you. And you're like, oh, my gosh. They never saw it coming. They never saw it coming. The name of the book, again, is Hitler's Monsters. Available in books.